Hello everybody, my name is Isy Mead. I am currently Head of Learning at the Story Museum in Oxford. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this. I'll talk a little bit about the Story Museum. I really love working in such a unique, inspiring place. It began in 2003. Kim Pickin, who had worked in Oxford University Press, really wanted a place that would preserve stories, because, you know, you can have museums that celebrate and preserve physical things, vases, pots, paintings, etc. What about the really intangible things? Stories are intangible. Obviously, they appear in lots of forms, for example, books, films, plays, etc. But the very heart of story, that intangible concept about the origin of story and the way that originally they were all oral anyway, how can that be preserved? And it's important that there is a place that preserves stories. It's many things, so it's also about stories in all their forms. And I guess the thing that I talk about quite a lot is the fact we always talk about story. So we don't talk about books, we talk about we're a place for stories. So obviously, reading for pleasure, reading, literacy, fundamental. There are countless reading for pleasure organisations, literacy organisations, and we're about that step before that. So it's incredibly important that children particularly read, but we're about the initial connection. Story is the concept that overrides all of this. Story is the underlying intangible structure, if you like. So we're about gaining an emotional connection to the story. And that emotional connection, we make no discrimination, I guess is the wrong word, but we do not suggest there is one way to make that emotional connection. So we're about stories in all their forms. Maybe you get that emotional connection through reading, but lots of children find the process of reading very dispiriting initially because it's about the decoding, the mechanisms. So in order to get that emotional connection, maybe they prefer hearing a story told to them orally. Maybe they prefer to watch a film, see a sculpture, do a dance, all kinds of stories, watch a football match. Stories are everywhere. So we wanted a place where everyone can gain that first initial connection to a story. In the museum itself, it would be about walking into a room in which you become the character of the story and you experience that. So the best example I can give, the one that's really the clearest, really crystallises what we're about, is a room where you open a wardrobe, you go through fur coats, you start to feel that these fur coats are a little bit prickly on your skin, and you realise they are pine trees, and you walk inside a snowy place, a snowy forest. There's a lamppost shining, you can smell a Turkish delight, you can walk in the snow, you can hear the wind. It's all these multi-sensory things. And whether or not you know you're walking into Narnia, you've had that experience as a character from that book. So obviously a lot of adults feel a lot of nostalgia because they read the book when they were growing up. Lots of children don't know the story, but once they have this kind of mystic connection to it, then they might want to explore it further. So that's the kind of genesis of the Story Museum. It's had quite a very long history now. In 2009, a wonderful person, don't know who they are, we call them the fairy godmother, bought a building in the centre of Oxford, right in the middle of Oxford. It had been derelict for 10 years. Huge old sorting offices to become the museum. And in 2014 it opened. At this point, completely dilapidated building still, obviously. You know, smashed windows, etc. But it was concentrating on art installations in each of those rooms. So Narnia in its first form featured there. And then part closure in 2018 because we had Heritage Lottery funding and many other, you know, donations, etc., other trusts and Arts Council funding, etc., to completely start again in that same building and make it a wonderful place. Ironically, this was due to open on the 4th of April 2020. So after having our 2 years of, you know, working so hard in the community and building up our audiences, etc., we managed to have one preview weekend and invited one school in. And then we had a lockdown. It's really sad, but obviously this is a national crisis, so that's just the way it's been. We don't know obviously when it will open again, but it will happen. It'll be even more exciting. As head of learning, my area is really obviously those initial audiences. Early years, it's fundamental that children get into a reading habit right from the age of 0. Some people would even say before that. There's whole projects, Welcome to the World projects, about reading to babies in their wombs even, because they're getting used to those cadences and they can hear them. So we have an awful lot on early years, and then all the way up. So we have primary schools who come in, different ways of ideas to get stories. I like them to all leave with an idea for their own story, either responding to the exhibitions or whatever. So they will have lots of exercises, but we've got to focus on talking, we've got to focus on the oral and exploring and drama and collaborative group work and so on, because we want them to have a different experience from maybe negative connotations, not completely, but maybe from the writing process. And we have secondary. Obviously, there's a small rite of passage, you know, the age of maybe 13 to 16. Where classically in the museum world, children don't want to go to museums. Young people don't want to go to museums. Fine, leave them alone. They're having a rite of passage. It's fine. But we do see coming back in the sixth form a lot of love and no inhibitions about, you know, I love Winnie the Pooh, for example. I want to go in the 100-acre wood. It's fine. And we do an awful lot of teacher training as well. So actually what I do a lot of now is training teachers in oral storytelling. This is what we get asked for the most. Because teachers are complete experts in, especially English teachers, you know, loving literature, responding, making up ideas for stories and so on. But oral storytelling is something which isn't necessarily so integral to teacher training. So get a lot of call for that. And it's so much fun. And children just love oral stories. When there's no barrier, there's no book between them, when they're just like they're having a conversation. And there's fascinating research about oral storytelling. Some cultures believe that you must never write down a story, because when you're speaking a story, all your ancestors who told you that story are speaking through you. So it's actually sacrilegious to write it down. So there's all these different nuances that we deal with as well. It's fascinating. I studied English literature and history of art, and I did a master's in history of art. I became a secondary teacher. I can't do art myself. It was all theoretical history, but obviously that's not a subject that comes up in secondary schools. So I became a secondary English teacher. Absolutely loved it, teaching in East London. I then did VSO for 2 years, training teachers in Rwanda. And happened to see, when I was out there, a job advertised at the Roald Dahl Museum and Story Centre in Great Missenden. And so it was because of that literacy background, I guess, the English teaching, that I managed to get that job in museums. I've been applying for museum jobs for about 9 years up until then. Absolutely wonderful place to work. Just it's not just about the history of Roald Dahl, it's about creating a new generation of writers inspired by Roald Dahl, because Roald Dahl didn't want children, you know, classically who, like Mike TV, watch TV. He wanted people to be like Matilda or like George's Marvellous Medicine, very inventive children. So we took that as the kind of ethos. And that was just a wonderful place to work. And it was really that I wanted to explore more. It's a really exciting brand, obviously, but, you know, it's one writer. So I really just fell at the Story Museum job, because it's all stories and it's endlessly learning and growing. So really was wonderful to, from head of learning at the Roald Dahl Museum, to work at the Story Museum. And as I say, I mean, it's just a dream. I loved writing stories when I was growing up, really loved it. There was nothing like, as far as I knew, I would have loved something that was just prizing me as a writer, making me feel like a writer. I think it's so important that children growing up feel that's harnessed. And it's in the last kind of 10, 20 years that this niche sector has emerged. So there's not just the Story Museum, there's also the Roald Dahl Museum, opened in 2005, so that's also very recent. There's the Discover Centre in East London, which is wonderful. There's the National Centre for Children's Books in Newcastle, which is called 7 Stories, which also creates exhibitions and exciting arts projects related to children's stories. And then there's countless other places that help creative writing. Ministry of Stories in Hackney, Hackney Pirates, just so many wonderful places that's all kind of emerged in the last 10, 20 years. You know, interestingly, at the same rise of the digital world, people are prizing the imagination. Of course, there's the Institute of the Imagination, which is going to be a wonderful centre in South Bank, I believe, I'm not sure, which is about the imagination. So there's all this rise about creativity, obviously also mindfulness, getting away from your screens, which is an interesting backlash to the digital world. Not that the digital world is evil, because obviously it's because of the digital world that we're all communicating right now in lockdown, and ironically what I'm doing right now here. I personally just think a teaching qualification just teaches you so much, and I continually learn from teachers, and the teaching world changes so much that I really value insight, because I left teaching in 2010, but that's not necessarily relevant to all of the book world. I think it's really about enthusiasm, and it's also about having that generosity of spirit. You have to have the kind of sense that stories don't belong to me, in a way that maybe actors would say, I am telling the story, this is me. You have to really be about stories belong to you. I want you to relate to this experience, and I want you to give me ideas to continue a story. I want you to work within yourself, to find that creative element within yourself. That's what I'd be looking for in a job interview. Obviously the arts world is very, very tricky in lots of ways. It's constantly looking for funding, gaining funding, and having to prove impact and evaluation and so on, and never being reliant on funding. Obviously, I can't even begin to explain what the current situation's done for the art world. But amongst those challenges, what makes the highlight. If something works really well, it's really wonderful, and people learn from it, and funders are delighted and so on, and you really see yourself making impact in the world, cliche as it is. That's something that's just indescribable, really, how wonderful it is. It's obviously an incredibly meaningful job. It's something which I don't really say that is a job, as opposed to something I would be volunteering for anyway, because it's so much fun. I would say, there's an awful lot of desk work, and when in the times when we were open as a museum, there would be a kind of routine. We would have 10 till 2 would be full of schools coming in to visit the museum and going round, and then 2 till 5 would be more of the managerial back work, I suppose. But then obviously we've got evening events occasionally, and we also have a huge outreach programme, so we might be out in schools or community centres delivering on projects. But because we believe that transport is a massive barrier to children getting cultural access, so and it's not just transport, actually, it's also about why would I want to I don't really see how this is for me. So you have to go into the communities first in some cases. At the moment we're just really hoping that we can open in 2020, but no one knows. And continue to go strength to strength, build visitor numbers, have more and more people coming to the museum to have their ideas inspired by stories, have more. Hopefully, I'd like to see, maybe this is more aspirational than 5 years' time, but much more diversity in children's book publishing that can therefore be reflected in the stories that we display in the museum, really being a trailblazer for diversity in children's books, because I think it's such a terrible issue, the fact that 1% of books published a year have a BAME protagonist. So I'm hoping that there'll be a shift there. So, yes, I hope that's a nice little overview for you. And hopefully you can visit us at the Story Museum in Oxford, or reach out, help us on our journey when we finally reopen. Thank you very much, and thank you for making me be a part of this. Bye.